One of the most common debates in the flexibility world is round vs straight back stretching. Many claim that stretching with a rounded back is ineffective or even dangerous, and others not only support that it's perfectly fine, but also that the straight back version has several limitations that can actually slow you down. So how should you stretch if you want to make serious progress without risking injury? The truth is there's no black and white answer, and the optimal option for you depends on several key factors that vary based on your individual needs. Here I'll show you everything you need to know by first comparing the effectiveness of these two options, then their safety, and finally provide practical recommendations. Let's dive in. So let's start from the top. Which of these two options is more effective for increasing flexibility? In flexibility training, we evaluate the effectiveness of an exercise by asking three questions. First, does it effectively stretch the targeted muscles? Then, is it an exercise that anyone, no matter their training level, can do? And finally, can you perform a variety of methods in this position? If the answer to all of these questions is yes, then the exercise is as effective as it gets. To answer them, I'll use the hamstring stretch as an example, since it's the most disputed exercise in the round vs straight back debate. However, everything I'll cover applies equally to other positions, like the pike and the narrow width pancake. So let's start with the first question. Can you effectively stretch your targeted muscles with both of these versions? The targeted muscles of a hip flexion stretch are the hamstrings, which run from the hip to the shin bone. Their primary function is to bend the knee and also extend the hip by pulling the pelvis. To stretch them, you should do the opposite, which is to keep your knee straight and tilt your pelvis forward. This is where supporters of straight back stretching step in, saying that when you round your back, you're only flexing the spine while nothing really happens at your pelvis. Of course, this isn't true, and it only takes 2 seconds to prove it yourself if you just round your back and try to touch your toes. If supposedly you can't stretch your hamstrings with a round back, why do you feel a strong stretch on them? This happens because once your spine reaches its maximum flexion, it then pulls your pelvis forward, stretching your hamstrings. So you achieve the same stretch, just in a different way. For example, assuming your max hip flexion is 30 degrees, with a straight back, you hinge 30 degrees forward, which automatically turns your hips 30 degrees to the front. With a rounded back, you first flex your spine while nothing happens to your hips. However, if you keep bending down, your spine will eventually pull your pelvis forward, creating the same 30-degree forward tilt. For your hamstrings, this is the same end result. So in terms of effectively stretching your muscles, both of these versions will do pretty much the same job. Now let's move to the second question about effectiveness. Can anyone perform these positions regardless of their flexibility level? This is where these versions start to diverge, and you might feel a difference in your training. On the one hand, the round back version is suitable for all levels. It doesn't matter how tight or how flexible you are, you can stretch with a round back effectively. However, on the other hand, the straight back version is more limited. Although it's great for mid-ranges, it is almost impossible for very inflexible people, and surprisingly, it's also entirely impossible for very flexible people at end-range positions. Let me explain why this happens, first for the very inflexible and then for the very flexible ones. Many times I've trained people who on their first day, they could barely hinge forward with a straight back. At that flexibility level, there are two problems with the straight back version. One is that the minimal forward bend that they're able to do isn't enough to leverage their weight and stretch effectively. And two is that the resistance of their hamstrings is so strong that they have to flex their back muscles with all their strength to hold the straight position. This leads to lower back fatigue long before they achieve the objectives of their flexibility workout. And of course, at that flexibility level, you can't even think about training with a straight back at the harder elevated or floor positions. You can only train standing, which limits your options. So to effectively train with a straight back, you need to already have a small level of flexibility. This way, you can leverage your weight over your body and don't exhaust your lower back. If you're not there yet, training is already hard enough, and forcing a straight back only adds unnecessary difficulty. And sure, you could fight through it, but in my view, there's more to lose than gain. So I don't consider this version suitable for very tight individuals. Surprisingly, the straight back version is also not possible for the other side of the spectrum, which are the very flexible individuals. If you're aiming to achieve the full pike or head to toe and you are flexible enough to get close to your legs, you will eventually reach a point where your abdomens hit against your thighs, forcing you to round in order to keep progressing. There's really no way around this, which is why you'll see that even in ballet, people eventually round once they get close to those ranges. So even if you are a die-hard straight back supporter, if you want to reach these positions, sooner or later you'll need to train with a round back. The bottom line for both options is that the round back version works for every level and position. On the other hand, the straight back is a great option for mid-ranges, but doesn't work for very stiff people and also for advanced positions. And finally, let's move on to the third question of the effectiveness part. Can you apply a wide variety of flexibility methods in this position? First, to get everyone on the same page, what does that mean and why do you need it? Depending on the mechanics and setup of each exercise, you can apply more or fewer flexibility methods. This matters because different flexibility methods trigger different mechanisms our body uses to increase flexibility, and using a variety of methods ensures that you activate all of them. So simply put, if one stretch allows the use of 10 methods and another only 2, the first one will be dramatically more effective. On this factor, both the round back and the straight back versions perform well. You can easily apply any of the more than 10 existing flexibility methods to either one. So let's summarize the effectiveness part. Both positions stretch the targeted muscles effectively. The round back version works for all levels, while the straight back works mainly on mid-ranges. And both allow the use of a wide variety of methods. These points seem to give the round back stretching a small advantage, but none of this will matter if it's not safe. Which brings us to the big question. Can round back stretching injure you? Let's get into it. Before we move on, I just want to quickly mention that our much anticipated new flexibility programs, the front split and the pike and head to toe, are coming very soon. For the first time, we'll also offer a limited discount 1 week before launch, so you might want to keep an eye out for that. Now, if you're not familiar with our programs, here's a quick overview of what to expect. These programs are built on the range optimization system, a new methodology that integrates all proven flexibility methods into a single evidence-based framework. That means you're training with every proven method, plus original techniques developed by our team. But probably one of the most important parts is that these are not just workout plans. You get a full year of guided training, individual assessments, customization based on your needs, and in-depth educational material on every aspect of flexibility training. The complete system includes hundreds of highly produced video tutorials and hundreds of PDFs, including programs, guides, and supporting material. It also includes our unique flexibility maps, which are the best tools available for visualizing your flexibility level and progress, tracking small milestones, and keeping you motivated. So if you're serious about your flexibility goals, it's definitely something worth checking out. Alright, let's get back to the video. Okay, so why do some warn against round back stretching? Is it something that can actually injure you? Let's break down everything you need to know, starting with the fundamentals. The mechanics of round back stretching. Today, we know that the neutral spine alignment, aka the straight back, is the least mechanically stressful position for bearing load. In contrast, a fully flexed position places the highest stress on the vertebral structure. In a real-life scenario, this simply means the spine experiences significantly less joint stress when holding 10 kilos in a straight position compared to holding the same weight in a rounded position. But on the stretches we discuss in this video, there is no external load on the back. So what can possibly increase the stress on the spine? Indeed, there is a way to increase the stress on the spine, but surprisingly, it doesn't come from the round back position itself, but the specific way you choose to progress to a deeper stretch. Here's how it works. When you stretch with a round back, two opposing forces come into play. One is your hamstrings pulling your pelvis in one direction, and the other is the force you create as you try to go deeper into the stretch. Here's the point that matters. Depending on the specific way you apply the second force, the one that helps you go deeper into the stretch, you either increase the stress on your spine or not. So let's look at all the ways you can push to go deeper into a round back stretch, which are 5, and then see which of them may be stressful for your spine. The first one is the body weight upper body drive, in which you simply pull with your arms to get closer to your leg. The second is the upper body drive with external load, aka loaded stretching. Here you simply use weight to go deeper into the stretch. The third one is the anterior tilt, on which you increase the stretch by tilting your hips forward while in a round back position. The fourth one is combining the body weight upper body drive with the anterior tilt. So you simply perform both at the same time. And the fifth one is to have a partner push you to go deeper, specifically from your lower back. Of these 5 options, only the body weight and loaded upper body drive techniques can increase lumbar spine stress. But why? It all depends on the force application point of the driving force, which is the force that pushes you deeper into the stretch. Here's how this point changes and why it matters. If someone pushes you deeper into the stretch, the force application point is wherever the push occurs. Here, here, or here. And its location determines the effect on your spine. The higher the force application point on the spinal column, the greater the joint stress on the vertebral structure, especially the lumbar region. This stress involves increased tensile and compressive forces on the discs, alongside the hydrostatic pressure shift that pushes the disc's soft center backward against its outer layers. This combined stress is highest when the forces are applied high on the spinal column, gets lower when the forces are applied low on the spinal column, and is next to zero when the forces are applied at the lumbar region. When you pull with your arms or use weight, the driving forces come from your arms, which attach at your shoulders. Therefore, the force application point is high on the spine, which is why these options can increase spinal stress. But that's not the case with the other techniques you can use. With the anterior tilt, the driving force comes by your hip flexors, located deep inside your hips and low on the spinal column. Similarly, having a partner assist from your lower back also places force low on the spine. That's why these options don't increase spinal loading. Finally, when combining anterior tilt with upper body drive, the lower force application point of the tilt counteracts the higher one from the upper body drive, bringing lumbar spine stress down again. Now, if all this sounds confusing, don't worry, you don't need to understand the mechanics of it. Just remember the key point, which is that a round back stretch on its own doesn't increase the stress on your spine. You have to either pull with your arms or use an external load for that to happen. In contrast, if you choose to progress using an anterior tilt, the combined tilt with upper body drive or the assisted pushdown, you don't increase spinal stress even though you're stretching with a round back. On the other side, the straight back version places very low stress on the lumbar structures either way, thanks to the neutral spinal alignment. So the first takeaway here is that although the straight back version places no stress on the spine, there are also stress-free options in the round back version. But the problem is that the round back versions that do increase spinal stress are also the ones that people use the most. For this reason, it is crucial to determine if this stress poses a danger. So let's get more specific. Is round back stretching with upper body drive capable of injuring you? The answer is no, but with a small catch that I'll explain in a minute. The reason why the answer is no is that the stress applied to our joints is not always a bad thing. So joint stress doesn't equal injury. In fact, there are many cases that is actually essential for progress. What a lot of people don't realize is that when you train, you're actually stressing and damaging your tissues. Then, as you recover, your body rebuilds them stronger. That's how you progress. What actually determines if the stress is beneficial or dangerous is the intensity and volume of your activity. If they are too low, nothing happens. If they're at the right level, you make progress. But if they're way too high, you enter the injury risk zone. That's why it's perfectly fine to train almost every movement with very low intensity and volume, while you should choose less mechanically stressful positions as you train with higher loads. The same rules apply in flexibility training. If the intensity and volume of your program is low, none of this position is dangerous. But here's the thing about flexibility training. The forces you apply stay relatively low no matter what you do. To put in perspective, consider that even in high intensity, high volume activities with a round back that are definitely well in the danger zone, it may take months or years of training for someone to actually get injured. And we're talking about repeatedly loading the spine with hundreds of kilos. In stretching, the forces created by the pull of your arms against your hamstrings are simply too low to put healthy individuals at risk, especially if you follow a program with a smooth progressive overload. However, there are two things that can put anyone at risk, and they may justify in a way those who oppose round back stretching. The first one is when you use upper body drive with external loads. Here, your injury risk level depends on the amount of weight you use, the volume of your program, and your training level. The lower your training level and the higher the intensity and volume, the higher the risk of injury. The second is more serious, as it can put anyone at risk, no matter the version they choose to stretch with. And I personally believe that this is probably the reason that created this whole debate in the first place. The second factor is having a predisposition to injury. So what is that? A person with a predisposition to injury is simply someone who, for various reasons, is more likely to get injured in a specific area of their body. This could come from a past injury, or as research shows, from cumulative stress that builds up over time. In either case, the joints are left in a more vulnerable state, making them easier to injure even during seemingly safe movements. This was also demonstrated in a 2015 study, where the authors reported that 32% of people who experienced acute low back pain said their injury occurred without any obvious external exertion. In other words, these individuals got injured by doing practically nothing, which indicates that something was already going on in their lower back beforehand. So if we know that people with a predisposition to low back injury can get injured by doing seemingly nothing, it is definitely possible that the same people can get injured on a round back stretch. As a matter of fact, if you can get injured by almost anything, it is very likely that you can even get injured while on a straight back stretch. However, this is far from proving that any of these types of stretching is inherently dangerous. Now, you might think that you don't know if you have a predisposition to injury. So in that case, how do you train safely and effectively? Here's what I believe is the best way to think about this. If you don't have any clear signs that you're prone to injury, you can't base your training on the assumption that you might. Because if you start doing that for several parts of your body, you'll end up doing nothing. That just limits your activity for no reason. In practice, if you're generally fit, have no pain, no relevant injury history, and no medical conditions affecting an area of your body, you're considered healthy and safe to train normally. However, if you have any reason to suspect a predisposition to low back injury, simply follow the practical recommendations I provide here. So let's talk about what you should do in practice and which option is best for you based on your individual needs. I'll first cover what healthy individuals should do, and then talk about what to do if you have a pre-existing back condition or just want to be extra cautious. Starting with the healthy individuals, the most important thing that will ensure your safety is not whether you stretch with a round or a straight back. Instead, it's managing well the intensity and volume of your program and making sure that you have a gradual introduction to the training contents that allows your body to adapt. Stretching is a relatively low intensity activity anyway, so if you manage these factors properly, you can safely train with any of the variations I covered here. Now, optimizing the effectiveness of your program is a different story. Since all of the versions we covered here stretch the targeted muscles effectively, your choice should be determined by your training level and the methods of your program. First, regarding your flexibility level, if you are very stiff or very flexible, you'll have to stretch with a round back. For mid-ranges, you can use any position. Then, regarding the methods of your program, you should always use the version that helps you personally apply each method effectively. For example, you might find that when performing the passive static method on the hamstring stretch, you're more comfortable with a round back and upper body drive. But when it comes to a different method on the same stretch, for example the antagonist active range, you feel a stronger activation with the straight back version. On the other hand, regarding on how you progress on round back stretches, you might notice that on one exercise you might progress more easily with the upper body drive, while on another with a tilt. Overall, I encourage you to think of all these versions as tools in your toolbox. For the best results, pick the one that helps you apply each method more effectively. Now let's see how you should plan your training if for whatever reason you want to be extra cautious with your lower back. Just like with healthy individuals, the key factors for preventing injury are the intensity, volume, and progression of your program. So, although flexibility training is in general a low-intensity activity, you can make it even safer by progressing slowly. In practice, this means starting with a low stretching intensity, doing a low number of sets per session, and spending more time on each phase of your program before moving to the next. When it comes to positioning, you can train with a straight back and the round back versions that don't increase spinal stress. And of course, make sure to choose between them based on what helps you apply each method of your program effectively. By following these guidelines, you'll make sure you reduce the stress on your spine as much as possible while still training effectively. So that was the video. If you made it this far, I want to give a special thanks to you. The people who stick around until the end of my videos have been the biggest supporters of this channel over the years. And you're also a big part of what kept me going when I was wondering if I should keep investing time on YouTube or not. So I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments. Share your thoughts on the channel, what you enjoy, what you'd like to see more of, or even what you think could be better. I read all the comments and your feedback shapes the content I create. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you all next time.